Good afternoon, and welcome to yet another extremely topical and extremely timely AMET webinar. Today is a very important day in the Jewish calendar. It is Yom Yerushalayim, the 28th of Iyar. It's a day of tremendous and profound significance for the Jewish people when the city of Jerusalem, after 2,000 years of exile, was reunited in 1967. For the first time in millennia, Jews had access to their one holiest site, the Western Wall, since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. I think it's critically important for our listeners to understand the primacy of Jerusalem for the Jewish people. This is our one holiest city. Muslims have two cities, Mecca and Medina, where they turn to when they pray. We Jews only turn to and pray towards Jerusalem. Catholics have Rome, Christians and Protestants have Bethlehem, and although Jerusalem is deemed holy to all three major faiths, none hold the profound and regnant value that Jerusalem holds for us Jews. It's been the thought of the return to Jerusalem under our own national sovereignty that has sustained us throughout the darkest days of our exile. I still remember my ecstasy as a young girl when the soldiers of the IDF broke through the old city gates and when Rabbi Mati Gar proclaimed, "The Temple Mount is in our hands." This has been the symbol of our national sovereignty, of our spiritual homeland, and of our eternal capital. As the poet Yehuda Amichai said, our port city on the shores of eternity. I now have the profound honor of turning to our very esteemed guest, Dr. Efraim Inbar, who's the director of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, as well as the director of international diplomacy for the Shalem Center, and he had been the founding director of the Begin-Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, a position that he held for over 23 years. Dr. Inbar has been a visiting professor at Georgetown University, Johns Hopkins University, and Boston University's a visiting scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and a Manfred Warner NATO Fellow. He's been president of the Israel Association of International Studies and has many, many, many esteemed accomplishments. He has also written 5 books and is a member of the academic committee of the Israel Defense Forces History Department. So it is now my esteemed pleasure to turn the podium over to Dr. Efraim Inbar, who will tell us about the strategic significance of Jerusalem to the Jewish people. Thank you, Efraim.
Thank you, Sarah, for your introduction. Shalom to everybody from Jerusalem. In every meeting of Jews together, we usually start with referring to the Torah portion we are reading on Shabbat. And this week we start reading a new book, the book of Numbers. And in the preface to the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, by the Netziv, who was head of a famous yeshiva, Volozhin yeshiva, and he has a famous commentary, Ha'amek Davar. He says, and I'm not going to read it in Hebrew, that upon entering the land of Israel, God no longer led the people of Israel in a miraculous way. And at this stage, there was less divine intervention by miracles, and Jewish history runs its natural course. It is the deeds of the Jews that makes the difference. This is definitely a Zionist outlook. I don't see it, in the current yeshivot, in many yeshivot in Israel today. But the Zionists demanded Jewish actions in order to change dramatically the course of Jewish history. Indeed, the Zionist movement achieved spectacular success through hard work and many sacrifices. We established a state in our historic homeland, and the majority of the Jewish people live now in the state of Israel. Our generation has the privilege to see a flourishing state of Israel, a state better integrated with its region after the peace treaty with Egypt, after the peace treaty with Jordan, and particularly after the Abraham Accords. These accords are almost intact despite the war in Gaza. Nowadays, we even talk about normalization with Saudi Arabia. As believing Jews, we know that we need divine assistance. Yet, we do not rely on miracles. אין לסמוך על הנס, as the Talmud says. We have an obligation to act wisely in ways that promote our redemption. Nowadays, we are proud of our ability to meet tremendous challenges. Nevertheless, we feel that we live in a miraculous era, and particularly on this day that commemorates the unification of Jerusalem. On this day, Israel's paratroopers entered the old city, and Mota Gur, their commander, called out, Har Habayit beyadenu. The Temple Mount is in our hands. I remember vividly how my platoon in the regular Nachal Brigade reacted when we heard we had a transistor that Jerusalem was liberated. We started singing and dancing full of joy. Jerusalem touches upon every Jew. For many Jews, for many years, Jews prayed toward Jerusalem, saying 3 times a day, "V'techezena einenu b'shuvcha leTzion," and may our eyes see you return to Zion. Every Passover, Jews have recited L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, without a clear program how to get there. At every Jewish wedding, the groom says, "Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishachach yemini." If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. This Yerushalayim of the prayers, of the ritual, has been mostly an abstract notion of a celestial entity. In contrast, we have today a terrestrial Yerushalayim, which is under Jewish sovereignty. This is a real city with people living there with specific municipal needs and problematic ethnic composition, as well as a complicated political and security situation. First, I would like to point out that on Yom Yerushalayim, we are more lonely than on any other day of the calendar. Nobody is celebrating with us. On Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Ha'atzmaut, leaders of the world send their greetings to Israel's leaders and their people, but not on Yom Yerushalayim. It is extremely disappointing that the right to designate a capital city that every state has is denied to the Jewish state. Few countries in the world are ready to recognize even West Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The international community refuses to accept Israel's sovereignty in the eternal city. Yom Yerushalayim validates Bilam's prophecy, Am Badad Yishkon, a people that shall dwell alone. The struggle for Jerusalem and for Har Habayit, the site of the divine spirit, is not over. Those that advocate dividing the city or internationalizing it should be reminded that when the Jews prayed at the temple in Jerusalem 3,000 years ago, their nations were no more than a collection of barbarian tribes. Moreover, there should be no negotiations with the Palestinians on final status issues, as long as the Palestinians continue the campaign to deny the existence of Jewish links to Jerusalem. No one who condones such a rewriting of history can be a partner for peace. The denial of Jewish roots in Jerusalem by the Palestinians is a recipe for continuous conflict. We need Jerusalem not only for fulfilling our religious journey, we need Jerusalem not only for connecting to our ancient history, We need Jerusalem not only for pursuing our Jewish destiny. We need Jerusalem for our mere physical existence. We need it for making the state of Israel secure. Jerusalem is important to us, not only because of religious or historic reasons. Jerusalem has paramount strategic significance. Israel's control of Jerusalem provides strategic depth to the densely populated coastal plain and vital links to the coast, to the Jordan River. Our eastern security border, ideas about dividing Jerusalem or allowing Arab controls in part of Greater Jerusalem jeopardizes Israel's future. Greater Jerusalem is an Archimedean point for controlling and maintaining security in the land of Israel west of the Jordan River. Please bear with me when I elaborate on these points. Jerusalem serves as a main junction between the east towards the Jordan Valley, the south and the north. Jerusalem controls the south-north axis along the watershed line of the Judean Central Mountain Ridge. It is also located in one of the few lateral axes that make it possible to travel by vehicle from the Jordan Valley westward to the mountain ridge of the Judean mountains and the Mediterranean. Indeed, a cursory look at the map shows clearly that Jerusalem is the only intersection along the mountain ridge of the land of Israel that has a Jewish majority. In an invasion from Jordan, forces from the coastal plain, where most of the Jews live and the emergency warehouses are concentrated, would have to make their way to the Jordan Valley. They could only do so in relative safety if there was a Jewish majority in Jerusalem. From a strategic standpoint, the corridor from Jerusalem to Ma'ale Adomim and from there to the Jordan Valley is of special importance. Israel's eastern border is the most important since it is the closest to the Jewish population concentrations. The aerial distance from the Jordan River to the Jerusalem is less than 18.6 miles, 30 kilometers, and to Tel Aviv, about 50 miles, 80 kilometers. The Tel Aviv-Jerusalem-Haifa triangle, which contains the majority of Israel's population and most of its economic infrastructure, is close to the Jordanian border, much more so than the Egyptian or even Syrian and Lebanese borders. Please remember that over 60% of Israel's Jewish residents live in the coastal strip between Hadera and Rehovot. This narrow strip is extremely dense urban area by any international standard. Its narrowest width between Netanya and Tulkarem is only 9.3 miles, 15 kilometers. This coastal strip is dominated from the east by the slopes of the mountain of Samaria in Judea. Along with the dense population concentration, many strategic assets are located in this narrow strip. For example, Ben Gurion Airport, Ashdod Port, power stations, banking headquarters, vital military bases, and the main headquarters of the security branches, the IDF, the Mossad, and the Shin Bet. These vital assets are observable from the slopes of the mountains that overlook the plain from the east, particularly the mountains of Samaria, and also within the range of short-range rockets, less than 25 miles, 40 kilometers. Within this range, these targets are also easily accessible to incursions by motorized commando forces and even infantry units. After October 7, this should be definitely considered a great hazard. Within the 67 borders, Israel lacked territorial depth, a basic condition for defensive warfare, even in the context of modern warfare. This is why David Ben-Gurion national security concept was based on rapidly transferring the war into enemy territory, that is an immediate transition to offensive operations. Unfortunately, this emphasis on preventive attacks was neglected in recent years by Israel. If Israel retreats to the 67 borders, the coastal strip will revert to its previous status as a territory lacking the depths required for defensive warfare. The IDF's forward line of deployment would again extend along the foothills of the mountains, east of Highway 6. If Israeli forces have to neutralize a threat from the West Bank cities, they will encounter major difficulties in launching the mission from the coastal plain. Mobilization areas will be exposed to monitoring and fire from the mountain slopes. Moving along hilly routes in a dense and hostile urban area will be dangerous, since the enemy will hunker down in tenacious defense, as it had in Lebanon and in Gaza. Controlling Jerusalem alleviates to a great extent such defenses deficiency. In 67 war, the Jerusalem corridor, which served as a wedge in the midst of the mountain ridge, was a base for the main offensive to conquer Ramallah area north of Jerusalem and the Hebron area south of it. Controlling the Jerusalem area also made possible the forward thrust of Operation Defensive Shield in March 2002 to put an end to the terrorist waves from the Palestinian Authority. The emphasis on Jerusalem as a center of gravity of the defensive system negates the possibility of dividing the city. In a divided city, it would be impossible to protect the urban seam lines crossing back and forth between the two political entities. In addition, Jerusalem's role in the defense of the coastal plain will be seriously compromised. Unless the greater Jerusalem area is controlled by Israel, that narrow coastal strip, which is dominated by the mountain ridges to the east, is not defensible. I invite you to come to some geopolitical tours that the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security conducts to see it with your own eyes. We are the only think tank that advocates a united Jerusalem. In addition to the concern discussed so far, control of Greater Jerusalem plays also a role in acquiring intelligence. The altitude of the Greater Jerusalem area, 700 to 800 altitude, gives the IDF intelligence advantages in the eastward direction, but also towards the south and the north. Dividing the city would jeopardize intelligence facilities because of the possibility of their disruption. The claim that planes and satellites can offer intelligence facilities in place of those situated on mountains is only partially correct. Compared to a mountain, only limited intelligence gathering means can be placed on planes and satellites. Moreover, there are ways of shooting down planes, and there are technologies for attacking satellites. It is much harder to topple a mountain. Continuing to rule over Jerusalem has positive strategic aspects. Above all, by retaining the area, despite demand for city division voiced by the Arab world and the international community, Israel demonstrates its resolve and fortitude, a crucial element in international relations, in particular in the Middle East. Indeed, the balance of power between Israel and its neighbors has been tilting in favor of the Jewish state. Continued Israeli control of Jerusalem also highlights Israel's ability to withstand international pressure. The international community's apparent displeasure over Israel's presence in East Jerusalem has not led to any serious sanctions. There have been, of course, anti-Israeli UN resolutions, UN a morally bankrupt institution, as well as condemnations. Nevertheless, Israel continues to hold all Jerusalem and other territories. The Arabs' inability to change the status quo through military force compels them to take the diplomatic route. The ongoing Israeli rule also creates legitimacy for making changes in the 67 borders and for expanding the territory under Israeli sovereignty. This is exactly what happened when President Donald Trump tabled his peace plan. The United States recognizes there are facts on the ground that cannot be eliminated. This contributed to the American recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Territorial concessions in Jerusalem will be inevitably interpreted as Israeli weakness and a victory for Islam, and will encourage radical elements in the Muslim and Arab world to keep eroding the Jewish presence in Jerusalem. Concessions in Jerusalem will likely be perceived as the beginning of a decline in Israel's strength. In general, Israel's continuous control of territories, and especially Jerusalem, contributes to the peace process. This process is built primarily on sustaining the existing power balance, with Israel strong and the Arab weak. This is why we have to destroy the military power of Hamas. If Israel is weakened and the Arab states are strengthened, then in the near future, there will be no reason whatsoever for the Arabs to come to terms with the existence of the Jewish state. Ben-Gurion's saying from 1968 is still relevant. Without, I quote, without a large growing Jewish settlement in the Jerusalem area, to the east, north, and south, peace will not come to the city of David. Another existential challenge is in the demographic domain. The problem relates not only to the proportion of Arabs vis-a-vis Jewish residents in the city, 60 to 40%. The city is inhabited by an increasing number of ultra-Orthodox Jewish residents and a diminishing number of secular Jews. In other words, the modern Zionist majority among the capital's Jewish residents is no longer existent. Secular Jews are living partially because they do not feel comfortable with the increasing ultra-Orthodox presence, while ultra-Orthodox residents contribute significantly to keeping a Jewish majority in the city. They have many babies and have other merits as well. They are not perceived as fully sharing the Zionist vision and do not seem to participate sufficiently in carrying the defense burden of securing the state of Israel. We are in the midst of a political campaign to try and enlist a larger proportion of the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox population, into the IDF. Moreover, in the long run, their demographic preeminence might erode the current significant consensus among Israeli Jews to keep the city united and hold on to the Temple Mount, which stands nowadays around 70%. If Jerusalem is seen primarily as a city of ultra-Orthodox Jews and Arabs, it is less likely to elicit support from the wider Israeli population for the difficult struggles ahead of us. Israel's government should offer incentives to encourage young people who have completed their military service to move to Jerusalem. Massive building in all parts of the city, Givat HaMatos, E1 area, should accompany such an effort to restore a clear modern Zionist majority to the city. The national religious sector, probably the most idealistic segment in Israeli society and the easiest to mobilize for national endeavors, also needs to change its priorities and award Jerusalem precedence over other parts of the land of Israel. Unfortunately, the religious Zionist party is wasting its energies in hills with little strategic significance in Judea and Samaria, instead of the highest prize possible, Jerusalem. We need a significant influx of Zionist Jews into Jerusalem. It's not enough to pray toward Jerusalem or remember it at our weddings. We need actions. It is imperative that Jerusalem be placed at the top of our priorities. Failing to do so weakens Israel and amounts to strategic blindness. Jerusalem is central to our destiny. Jerusalem is one of the oldest cities in the world. It is still charming and energizing. I am a Jerusalemite, married in Jerusalem. My children were born in the city, eighth generation in the land of Israel. I am passionate about my city. At the same time, I understand that the whole world looks at Jerusalem, particularly when the Jews rule over it. We have to be careful and not to be carried away by our sentiments. Prudence is required. While we believe in the beginning of redemption, Akalta de Geula, we should not forget that the city was twice destroyed by greater forces, the superpowers of that time. Yet, the prophecy of Zechariah, chapter 8, seems to be realized, as Rabbi Akiva anticipated. Once again, men and women of ripe old age will sit in the streets of Jerusalem, each of them with cane in hand because of their age. The city streets will be filled with boys and girls playing there. It behooves Israel's government and the Jewish people to make Jerusalem its top priority. The incalculable strategic significance of Jerusalem eclipses that of any other city, town, hill in the land of Israel. The eternal city, the city of David, Jerusalem is a place where the future of the Jewish state will be determined. At this stage, we should thank God and hope we will keep the city united to be able to celebrate Yom Yerushalayim for many years. זה היום עשה אדוני, נגילה ונשמחה בו. Today, God has made, we'll discover and rejoice in him. Yom Yerushalayim Sameach.
Beautiful, beautiful, very comprehensive, and very profound. We have time for several questions. I would like to ask you a few. One is, I remember in 1995, the Jerusalem Embassy Relocation Act. I remember, and it took a long time. It took until 2007 when actually that was realized. And then I remember the day after in the United Nations, the condemnation from the international community of moving the Israeli embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and the prophets of doom and gloom from the State Department that said that all of the Arabs would be on the streets in every capital rioting, and that so can you extrapolate, if you will, Ephraim, as to what signs of strength we should be looking for, and how we should be conducting, or how Israel should be conducting its foreign policy, and especially at a time like this when there are unfortunately, many riots going and taking part throughout Judea and Samaria, and we have a war going on in Gaza with tremendous sacrifices, and it very, very much looks like any day now we'll be entering a war up north with Hezbollah. So how would you extrapolate from this?
Well, first of all, we should be aware that there is greater acceptance of Jerusalem as Israel's capital after the American move. We have here the Czechs, the Hungarians, I think the Poles are considering. We have other consulates. The EU is not in favor of it, but there are European states that ignore the EU, which is basically in foreign affairs anti-Israeli institution. And facts on the ground count. And I would like to tell you a story. I go often to the eastern part of the city. I meet people, and I met a Mukhtar, a leader of a neighborhood, And it was after the move of the American embassy to Jerusalem, and he told me, it's over. I said, what do you mean? We are not sitting anymore on the fence. Now we understand that Jerusalem is not going to be divided. You have the backing of the United States, the greatest power. We'll play less games, with you. And this was basically a recognition of the Arabs, at least one Arab, which is representative of some segments, that Jerusalem is going to be under Israeli rule. By the way, all polls show that the Arabs in Jerusalem, a great majority of them, are in favor of the status quo, of remaining within Israel. There are growing numbers of Arabs in Jerusalem that are learning Hebrew, for example. There are a growing number of teenagers, high school kids in the Arab sector that choose schools with an Israeli curriculum rather than Palestinian curriculum. Actually, we don't have enough classes for them. If anybody wants to donate here $1 million, we'll build an additional class for them in Jerusalem. And of course, they are fully integrated in the Jerusalem economy. You meet them anywhere, everywhere, in every job possible, doctors, pharmacists, menial workers, all over they are. And they are earning just like Israelis. There is no discrimination. So there is a slow process of Israelization of the Arabs in Jerusalem. They do not necessarily love us, but we don't need love, we need abiding by the law. And generally, the Arab sector is divided into three. About 70% people that are not political, like in every other place in the world. 15% are about Hamas, and 50% are nationals. And Hamas, by the way, is cooperating with the municipality because they think in the long run will disappear. So let's take the money in the meantime. So they seem more pragmatic. So Jerusalem is an issue. I think that Israeli governments were reluctant to raise it more forcefully. I think that we should do it more forcefully. Maybe not now. Now it's not the best time. But this should be a regular point of discussion with world leaders. And to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And if they don't like Old Jerusalem, okay, let them have the embassy in West Jerusalem. I see here a question. Is there any leader urging modern Orthodox settlers? From Larry Feingold. Shalom, Larry. No. The answer is no, and I'm very frustrated by this fact. And I hope this will change. I'm not sure because of ideological inflexibility. And it's
so have you
it's terrible.
Right, it is really, it's tragic. Are you aware of any efforts by Iran or third-party hands from Iran or Turkey, the Palestinian Authority, to buy plots of land within Jerusalem and Arabize it?
They are, we have, first of all, of course, the Palestinian Authority has a presence in the city. They terrorize the Arab citizens. This is the main reason why they do not participate in the municipal elections. We have a Turkish presence. Turkey spends a lot of money via TICA, their agency for foreign aid in the city. You may see in many places in East Jerusalem the picture of Erdogan. They like him. He's championing the Palestinian cause. The EU supports many causes in East Jerusalem, and they try, all of them try to undermine the Israeli sovereignty. And of course, there are other actors in the UN, of course. We have UNRWA in the city, and I hope finally will not allow them to operate in the city, because UNRWA is a very bad institution. They simply perpetuate the conflict through their education system. So there are actors in the city, and we are a democratic country. We cannot kick them out as long as they operate legally. And it is to some extent a problem. Actually, we are probably will be publishing soon a longer article about the actors that try to undermine Israel's sovereignty in the city.
And we know there
Our low slogan, by the way, JISS, is we are in favor of a strong Israel and a united Jerusalem. This is our slogan.
Beautiful. And of course, we have been studying, and many others have been studying the UNRWA textbooks for years and years. Are there efforts now in the Knesset to either eliminate these UNRWA textbooks and replace them, or is there any kind of effort whatsoever? Because we know that they're just replete with anti-Semitic hatred, and extolling the virtues of martyrdom, replacing Israel with a map of Palestine, et cetera, et cetera. So have there been efforts?
There is always a struggle to expel foreign agents that are not allowed to work in the city. By the way, we have an agreement with the PA, but the PA, of course, they are not the British gentlemen that keep agreements. So it's a continuous struggle. It's
right. There have been some comments also.
We see that the facts on the ground are very important. Unfortunately, the demographic struggle we are losing. By the way, in 67, I don't know if our audience is aware, the ratio was only 27% of the population was Arab. Now they are 40. And when the Palestinian authorities accusing of Judaizing Jerusalem, it's ridiculous, because actually the opposite is happening.
Exactly. Okay. There have been some comments about the cost of real estate, of housing in Jerusalem, and how difficult it is for young families, for secular people and modern Orthodox people to move there because of the cost of rentals and buying homes there. Is there anything that can be done about that?
This is very true, that housing in Jerusalem is more expensive than in most parts of the country, not Tel Aviv, by the way. And one reason for it is, I must say that American Jews are buying homes in Jerusalem for coming for holidays. And this, of course, is making competition more difficult. And because there is more demand. But I think that the government should try to build cheap housing for young couples. And I'm not expert on this area, but I'm sure there are ways to encourage. For example, the students that study at Hebrew U to stay in town. Jerusalem has a good technological base. We have many foreign firms establishing research centers in Jerusalem because the Hebrew University is a good university. So there is this element. It's not but it is a poor city because of the ultra-Orthodox that don't work. Right. And are a burden, are an economic burden to the city.
Right. So one of our readers or listeners wanted to understand the distinction between the modern Orthodox attitude regarding Jerusalem from the Haredi and ultra-Orthodox.
I think both appreciate Jerusalem, both would like to live in Jerusalem. The big difference is political. The Orthodox, modern Orthodox, understands that this is a capital and it's important to maintain Jerusalem as a capital of Israel and not to make any concessions. The ultra-Orthodox are less willing to pay a price for controlling the city. And I can envision actually if the Arabs in the city will be participating in the elections, they will, 40%, even if only half of them, 20%, they will get 20% of the seats in the municipal council, and they can make a coalition with the Orthodox. I'm not sure it will be best for the city, but this is a political possibility. So far, the Arabs don't participate in the election, although in the last election, there was the first time when an Arab list tried to run for the municipal council.
So even during the years of the Oslo Accords, the issue of Jerusalem was not the part of the Accords. It was going to be put off for knowing how complicated it was. Do you feel among secular Israelis at this point and left-wing Israelis, they would still be willing to divide Jerusalem?
The taboo was violated by Ehud Barak in year 2000 at Camp David, when he was willing to divide Jerusalem. As a result of the violation of this taboo, there was a growing number of Israeli seculars, leftists that believe that for the sake of peace, it's important. Peace is more important than Jerusalem, not for me. But still, the numbers are small. It's not the majority of the Jews in Israel are ready to fight for Jerusalem. If you have to weigh some kind of messianic peace vis-a-vis control of Jerusalem today, they will say, I'm in favor of fighting for Jerusalem if necessary. But attitudes can change. This is why I'm concerned. If we don't have a demographic shift in Jerusalem.
I have to say, I am speaking from Israel now, Modin, Israel, and wherever I go, I see people wearing the map of Israel around their neck, wearing the metal necklaces for the hostages. I see Israeli flags. It seems that to me, the patriotism, the sense of resolve and unity among Israelis is so much greater than among Americans. And I think that despite the fact that there are certain courses that have been eliminated from, the Bagrut, etc., the exam one has to take, there is still a sense of knowledge of Israel's enemies, and that this is an existential war. And the barometer, I think, in terms of patriotism and nationalism, registers a great deal, much more significantly higher in Israel than in the United States, despite the fact that this war has dragged on for almost 5 months. Would you agree, Efraim?
Listen, on October 7, there was a statist failure. the state failed us. Having said that, the civil society in Israel demonstrated great fortitude, great ingenuity, and where the state failed, the civil society came in. And it is remarkable what civilians, just citizens decided to do. And I'm not talking about just, taking their pistol and going to fight on the front. Great numbers of reservists. The spirit is high. Even today, when the world is being dragged already 8 months. So the Israeli society has met the most difficult test, the test of war, and is willing to continue to fight for victory. And victory is well defined to destroy the military capabilities of Hamas. And we understand that it's important to restore our deterrence. Many see this war as the war of independence. And many Israelis are ready for going to a next war in Lebanon if necessary. It is true that the hostages created great emotions among many people. And the argument to stop the war in order to save the hostages fell on many willing ears. I personally don't think so, but I, of course, I'm not going to argue with the families of the hostages. And they have every right, to demand from the government to bring back the hostages. This, to some extent, of course, weakens Israel vis-a-vis Hamas. But this is a legitimate protest in a democratic country, particularly, taking consideration that everybody understands that the hostages do not live in a 5-star hotel in Gaza. So it's what happened. It's terrible, and it affects many Israelis who feel that we are failing good Israeli citizens. Basically, those kidnapped, many of them were pioneers along the border. They were doing their best to make the land of Israel bloom. And they had an important contribution to the state of Israel. And the tragedy happened. And it's not, I have my own views, what I understand it. Others think have a different priority.
I would like to submit that this generation of Israeli who puts on their olive uniform, goes into the reserves, goes into the regular army service, is among the best that we've ever had. And I'm, very closely related to one of them, very, very proud. And I know this has been a very long, hard slug, yet people do not seem to lose their resolve. They know this is an existential war. And so I can't thank you enough, Efraim. This has been really brilliant and comprehensive, and we appreciate everything that you do and have done for the state of Israel and for Jerusalem. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All the best from Jerusalem.
Thank you. Bye-bye.